Elden Ring is without question one of the video games of all time. It seems to be hailed among many as From Software's greatest of works, their magnum opus of sorts, that it perfected the formula. In case you're new to my channel, I am a huge Souls fan. This series of games single-handedly ignited within me a belief that video games can be art, and above that, they have the ability to achieve things that no show, movie, or book could ever hope to achieve. I firmly believe that Dark Souls 3 will forever be the greatest gaming experience I have ever had the fortune of having. And it's also not alone in its brilliance, being very closely followed by Bloodborne, Sekiro, and the rest of the Dark Souls series. So suffice to say, I was extremely excited to see how From Software's newest title of Elden Ring would perform. And like most fans of the series, I had extremely high hopes. Only they were never met. Yes, if the video title didn't give it away already, I'm among the few who are actually very disappointed in this game. However, that's not to say that I think this is the worst installment in the series. This is the middle of the pack for Souls games in my opinion. There are a lot of things that this game does exceptionally well, and for the most part I do believe that those are the things that many fans of this game have decided to latch onto. But in my opinion, for every two great things that Elden Ring does, there is one equally bad thing weighing this game down. So to kick off this review, I'm actually going to present my main thoughts right away. Elden Ring, while still a fantastic video game with hundreds of strengths, it is in fact one of the weakest Souls games that From Software has produced. It is a game that chose to forego many of the strengths of its predecessors in favour of making a video game experience more tailored for a wider audience. It chose to focus almost all of its efforts and its creativity on its world, ultimately leaving things like the balance of its difficulty and the mechanical design of its boss fights to rot. So, yeah. If you disagree, please keep watching and hear me out. And if by the end you still disagree, then please tell me in the comments below why. And obviously if you enjoy this video, agreement or no agreement, then please be sure to like and subscribe for more reviews and discussions of games and TV shows. I'm going to elaborate further on my disappointments, don't worry, but I don't want to paint Elden Ring as a bad game, because it really isn't. So for the sake of staying objective, I firstly really want to acknowledge what this game excels at. While this isn't the strongest From Software title, it is still without question one of the best open world games many will have the fortune of playing. Below Breath of the Wild for its open world exploration, but surpassing it in its combat mechanics and its RPG elements. As countless people before me have pointed out, the reason this open world works better than most games is largely in part to how they fill the expansive open spaces. Whether it's through ruins to loot, small dungeons to explore, or surprise environmental boss fights, there's always one thing after the other for you to find on your journey, and you will never have to needlessly walk for 5 minutes just to find something. No. The goodies are a mere 20-second horse ride apart from each other. However, this game's biggest strength is not in fact its open world, but its so-called legacy dungeons, which bring back the familiar style of level design from previous soulsborne titles. Elden Ring boasts some of the most visually interesting and intricately designed areas that From Software has graced us with to date, some even fantastic enough to rival the locations of Dark Souls 2's DLCs. Areas like Landale Capital City made me realize just how much we take for granted the care and the craftsmanship that From Software put into these levels. I cannot even express through words just how happy it made me feel whenever I finally came across a shortcut in the form of an elevator or a ladder. I thoroughly loved the open world experiences, but I would often find myself missing the intricacies of stuff like this. Seeing the words "you must open this door from the other side" pop up on my screen gave me more satisfaction than it probably should have. And this is all without mentioning the sheer wonder and awe that these areas bring with them from a visual standpoint. While most of your time in these locations will be spent traversing through back alleys, sewers, and the insides of various buildings, in those brief times where you actually get to take in the area you are about to explore, it really feels as though you've stepped inside of a painting. A painting that wants to kill you, mind you, but a beautiful painting nonetheless. The RPG elements in Elden Ring are also the most refined they have ever been. The build up to slaying gods and demons is a core element of every Souls game, but Elden Ring does a fantastic job at actually making you feel strong enough for these kinds of feats. Magic in this game feels powerful, and it's far more varied and interesting than it ever used to be. Gone are the days of basic blue, yellow, and orange magic shots that come in small, big, and even bigger sizes. Now you can launch full moons at your enemies, create overhead clouds that shower enemies enemies of stars or literally become a fire-breathing dragon. Not only does magic feel stronger and more powerful, but it generally just feels better to use. The Ash of War system is also incredible and a big step up from Infusements. The freedom of being able to mix and match different weapons and different skills not only opens up even more doors for build variety, but it perfectly brings the freedom of the open world into the way you make your characters as well. Another thing that Elden Ring did was it brought us what are undeniably the most cinematic boss fights in the series. The sheer scale and spectacle of these fights is nothing to scoff at. Godric grafts a dragon head onto his arm, Brunella summons great spirits to fend you off, all against the backdrop of a moonlit lake, Radahn becomes a literal meteor, and below the surface of a volcano lies a god-eating serpent that when defeated transforms into this world's version of Satan. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. As for the quality of these boss fights, what is that? What is that move, man? We'll talk about that later. Finally, we have what I personally liked most about this game, and that is the characters and the NPC questlines. Confusing and convoluted as it may be, I've always enjoyed the way these games handle their story and character interactions. You're never once told exactly where to go to help out an NPC, and while many casual players may find this frustrating, I think it's rather expertly done. To progress a character's story, it really feels like you have to care about that character. You have to actively listen to what they have to say and what you have to do. Where Elden Ring sets itself apart from previous titles, however, is in the sheer scale and impact of these side quests. These quests not only span across a large majority of your playthrough, but many have a direct influence on the ending of the game, all the while providing you with plenty of loot and secret boss fights unique to that questline. On top of the great side quests, this game also boasts an incredibly interesting and memorable cast of characters. Luna Consort Rani, Margaret Thatcher the Snowman Queen, Sir Gideon the Not-So-All-Knowing, and the detestable Dookie Devourer are all among some of the best characters that From Software have ever brought us. Maybe George R. R. Martin had something to do with that, or maybe he didn't, but it nevertheless feels like he did. And naturally, with such a great cast of characters already appearing in this game, they just had to bring Best Boy Patches back for his 5th appearance since Demon's Souls. We will never be rid of this mischievous fella, and I would have it no other way. All in all, this game does a lot of things right in terms of its mechanics, main level design, story, and its open world elements. However, as stated, it is far from the best Souls game, especially in terms of boss fights and overall fair and well designed challenge. So without further ado, it's time for Unfortunately, my experience of this game was not all sunshine and rainbows like I just made it sound. Don't worry, everything I just said is the truth, albeit with some things looked over and some things blatantly ignored. I want to let it be known that I do like the game for all of those things, but I do not love it. I promise that I will be brutally honest after all, so here goes. This game often suffers from the Dark Souls 2 problem, of things being artificially difficult just for the sake of making the game harder than it really has to be. Bosses like Millennia, Mog, Rickard and Radahn, for example, are all let down by one or two really bullshit moves. You know the ones. The rocks, the skulls, the whatever that is. It's just like a dance! These quote-unquote moves end up drastically lowering the quality of these boss fights, most especially in the case of Millennia. Where I feel this game really dropped the ball in terms of its boss design is in a fatal lack of understanding of what made fights like Orphan of Kos, Slave Knight Gale, Dark Eater Madeira and Swordstain Ishin so great. Sure, those fights are most memorable due to their difficulty, but it's not enough for a boss fight to just be hard. In truth, Souls games are unequivocally at their best when challenging the player's knowledge, skill, and understanding in a fair way. We don't play these games because we love the "you died" screen. No sane person likes the "you died" screen. However, it seems this time around Miyazaki seemingly took no-hit runs as a personal insult, and so designed many of the boss fights around this philosophy of containing as much unfair stuff as possible. We're talking things like multiple AoEs in quick succession that make it impossible to time all of your rolls through them, multiple 2-on-1 fights where both enemies are insanely fast and hard-hitting, input readings that make analysing for a break in a boss's attack pattern to be completely redundant, and in general a lot of moves that deal far more damage than they have any right dealing in the first place. As Dunkey puts it,
having super aggressive enemies with crazy combos and unpredictable attacks is the fun kind of difficult, but making those moves max hit for your entire health bar is fucking lame and cheap.
Now, normally I wouldn't include arguments from other content creators, but I feel like he said it pretty well, so I included it. Listen, I have a confession, guys. I like the Orphan of Cosfight. I like it because it keeps me on my toes, forces me to analyze a very challenging moveset, but a moveset full of well-telegraphed attacks that are possible to dodge without a PhD in quantum physics. Trust me when I say that I would like that boss fight far less if the Orphan had an attack that forced me to run around the arena for 2 minutes in fear of being one-shot by something stupid and out of my control. Elden Ring feels like it is specifically engineered to punish players for simply playing the game like a Souls game. It definitely feels like most bosses and areas were designed with the idea in mind that you should be using spirit summons or ranged attacks. Because of this, pure 1v1 melee is just straight up harder and sometimes borderline unfun and unplayable at points. Obviously this doesn't affect everybody, but for somebody who personally prefers to get up in a boss's face with a cool melee weapon, it can be very frustrating when a fight is clearly balanced around ranged or 2-on-1 combat. What seems to end up happening for a lot of people is that they all often find themselves being funneled into using the exact same thing. You may have heard of it. It's called the Mimic tier. There's a reason why so many players resort to using such an item. Yes, it's beyond broken, but when the game throws a boss fight like the Godskin duo at players, of course they're going to use it. Why on earth would I fight Millennia, a boss who I know is specifically designed just to kill me, and then proceed to not use such an item? I need to stress that no other Souls game has ever forcibly gotten me to forego that go-it-alone playstyle. However, when the game suddenly decided to hit me with this, and then bashed it against my skull for 6 straight hours, it wasn't very surprising that when it then handed me an OP magic katana and a clone of myself, yeah, I used them! A lot of people have come out and said that this is the player's fault, that it was our inability to adapt that caused us to be frustrated. And I've heard this take over and over again, and I'm gonna be real with you. That's fucking stupid. Dark Souls 2 and Sekiro are games that want you to adapt to a new playstyle. In those games, the combat and gameplay have been fundamentally altered to where you have no other option but to play the game how the developers wanted you to. Elden Ring, on the other hand, presents its new mechanics to you as basically optional. Spirit summons are optional. Elden Ring's combat mechanics are not fundamentally new. They are virtually a copy-paste of Dark Souls 3's, only with a jump button added on. It was obvious that players were going to gravitate towards the same playstyle that they've always enjoyed in previous games, and I think it's incredibly stupid to suggest that the game at any point intentionally discourages this. It does discourage it, mind you, but it's not intentional, and it's not until much later into the game. The next topic I want to talk about are the optional mini-dungeons in this game, which I must admit, at the start I definitely thought they were a welcome addition, but after a while they became either redundant, tedious, or just pointless to traverse through. I mentioned in my positives that the open world itself was well made, but while that is the case, the truth of the matter is that it doesn't lend itself well to repeat playthroughs. The dungeons are a perfect example of this. They're kind of just chalice dungeons, but with even more lackluster rewards. The only reason you explore them in the first place is the faint hope that there might be a cool item at the end, which more often than not, there isn't, and thus there is no need to ever revisit them on future playthroughs. The Chalice dungeons at the very least actually had some good boss fights, emphasis on some. The Catacomb and Hero's Grave mini dungeons in particular are straight up awful most of the time. Of all the things in Dark Souls 2 to take inspiration from, constant surprise ambushes and the Executioner's Chariot are not the best choices if you want to make something fun to explore. Weapon balance is awful. I don't really need to elaborate on this much, everyone who's played the game knows it. On one end, we have Rivers of Blood, Moonveil, Sword of Night and Flame, and countless other weapons that just trivialize the game by stacking bleed proc or stun-locking bosses into oblivion. On the other end of the spectrum, we have stuff like Colossal Swords, an entire class of weapon dedicated to getting its user killed, thanks to the enormous amount of end lag at the end of swings, or Rapiers, which may as well be replaced with sticks at this point, because all you ever manage to do with them is poke the boss until they get agitated and kill you in retaliation. Critical hits do nothing, even on weapons of crit multipliers, and Frost once again is just a worse alternative to bleed in every way, since it both does less damage and there's a cooldown on when you can proc it. These are just things that I came up with off the top of my head. As many players say, this game is as easy or as hard as you yourself make it. Not because it's intentional by the developers, but because the balance is just... dude, I don't know. it's awful. I don't know what else to say. The game's performance on PC lets it down immensely as well, and has been the cause of many a death over the course of my 5 playthroughs. It's the worst feeling in the world playing through a boss fight efficiently, only for a sudden frame drop to mess up your rhythm and get you killed. This game at times leaves very little room for mistakes, and having it run like arse due to poor optimization does not help this fact. This is a problem that really needs to be looked into as soon as possible, and one that is commonly cited in all reviews as the biggest thing letting this game down. I personally think that this is a minor point, but it's still very important to address. Speaking of minor points, I want to quickly regurgitate a great point that a friend of mine made in our Ranking the Bosses of Elden Ring series. That point is this: one of the main benefits of having an open fantasy world like this is that you can have a really alive setting that pulls players into it and immerses them. Overall, you lose an element of focus, but you gain this excitement that comes with exploring and discovering new things. However, in the case of Elden Ring, thanks to the repeating of boss fights and the naming of certain items and areas,
Sort of the names and the stories and the sort of setting around them sucks ass.
as Finn goes on to say, it is important at the very least that a world like this is populated with things that have cool and memorable names. To use an example from Dark Souls 3, Udix Gundyr, despite being a very minor character within the established world, is still given a unique and memorable name. It brings the world to life, and it gives us more incentive to question why this man is here to begin with. What's his story? Why is he fighting us? In Elden Ring, the open world is filled with placeholder title names like the Godskin Noble, Godskin Apostle, and Crucible Knight. Even Dark Souls 2 gave the Ruin Sentinels names, and they were identical to one another. How about this? A lonely giant, a survivor of a great war who guards a magical flame at the highest peak of the world and who was the very last of his species. What's his name? I don't know, he's just the fire giant because, he's a giant and he uses fire. Or how about a sentient giant wolf with the power to cast magic who was given to a queen of the moon as a gift from her lover? They never named it. It's literally just known to the world as the red dog that belonged to this guy. But listen, it's a very minor point, I know, but this is important for creating a game like this. If you want your open world to feel interesting and unique, for God's sake, do not name your weapon upgrade material Smithing Stone. Finally, we have the late game difficulty scaling. It's not too noticeable for the first few major areas, but by the time you get to mountaintops of the giants, everything pretty much just one-shots you. People always criticize Dark Souls 2 for having a stat that the game pretty much forces you to level, and they're completely justified in criticizing it. ADP is tied with World Tendency for quite possibly being the worst mechanic ever implemented into these games. However, how is Elden Ring's Vigor stat any different? Hard leveling Vigor in these games has always been optional. Obviously, it's very beneficial to increase your health bar, but previously you could get by with just a few points in the stat. In Elden Ring, Vigor is literally a requirement. If you do not level it to 50 or higher, you will get one-shot. Oh my god, man. Sorry, how much f***ing damage do you want to start doing? Oh, sorry,
That doesn't seem fair.
It's become a common trend at this point for anybody expressing issues with the enemy damage to be met with people saying, bro, just level Vigor, which is literally the exact same thing people gave Dark Souls 2 shit for. I'm saying that we should hold these games to similar standards. By all means, enjoy Elden Ring more than Dark Souls 2, but do not pretend that this game does not share many of the same problems. Towards the end of the game, there's just this huge difficulty spike in stat check that comes out of absolutely nowhere. Suddenly, all the enemies need to be 8 feet tall and insanely fast and aggressive, and all the optional bosses are given damage stats that make Medea look like an oversized rubber chicken. Malekith and Godfrey are fantastic, don't get me wrong, the former being the best boss in the whole game. But outside of them, everything in the late game is just so awfully balanced and overtuned that it's kind of hard to take it all seriously at points, as though this is just another Soulsborne rip-off game that thinks the key to these games' success was how unapologetically difficult they were. To wrap up this review, listen, I like the game, the same way I like all Souls games, but when compared to Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne, it doesn't hold a candle to their level of intricate design and well-rounded balanced difficulty. I think it's important for me to highlight that these negative criticisms are in no way to be interpreted as me saying the game is bad or that you aren't allowed to enjoy this game for some reason. Listen, the game is good, very good, incredible even. However, it's mostly incredible at the stuff that Souls games never really were incredible at. It's a game that expertly achieves what what many modern titles fail at, but it botches the very basics that its predecessors got so right. I personally would like to push back against the notion that Elden Ring is better than all previous titles. It's a very good game, but it most certainly is not a masterpiece. And you know what else it isn't? It's not a shattered masterpiece, an overrated masterpiece, or a troubled masterpiece. It's not any kind of masterpiece. Stop trying to cover your ass by directly breaking the definition of that word. Also, what the hell is this? How can anything be perfectly imbalanced? I can't believe we live in a time where people can defend poor design by saying that it's perfect at how poor the design is. People just need to grow a backbone. I don't know why we're so afraid to just come out and say that the game is flawed without hiding behind these buzzwords. And Zero Lenny, I love you, man, but it definitely did not perfect the Souls genre. In fact, it took a big step back, to be brutally honest. I feel as though From Software is getting to a point where they're using the fact that these games are supposed to be difficult as an excuse to just hand-wave away bad game design. And this is coming from someone who genuinely feels these games are at their best when they're challenging. So, for a final verdict, I would still give Elden Ring as a video game a very solid 80%. However, for a Souls game, I'm giving it a 60.
Now, let's settle the score.
It still does things better than previous Souls titles, but when compared overall to other games of its genre, I just find that it doesn't hold much weight. Anyways, that'll be it from me. If you disagree or have any criticism of your own to add to this discussion, then please comment down below your thoughts. I'd love to talk more about this in the future if other people are willing to hear me out on it. On that note, if you would like to see my thoughts on the boss fights in greater detail, then be sure to check out my 2 boss ranking videos that came out last month. Please subscribe for more content like this, and I hope to see you all next time. Anyway, see ya. What the f*** happened there?
That doesn't seem fair.